people often ask, how come you did this exhibit? And of course I ask myself the same question, how come I did it? Well, I came of age during the Vietnam War. I was ready to graduate from college, a little college called Shimer College. And I knew I was going to get drafted. I was next in line. So I thought I'd better read about what's going on, and I was lucky enough to find articles by Jonathan Schell. And Jonathan Schell was up in the spotter planes. He did an amazing job. He was quite young, 22 or so. An amazing job. He'd go out in the field and get with the troops and get up in these spotter planes, and he saw that airstrikes were being called in indiscriminately on Vietnamese. And he described the impacts of some of those. And he started talking about these free fire zones and how they worked. And I realized, and I was probably 22, I can't go, I can't participate in this. Well, I did a little bit of a dance step with my draft board. They were not very cooperative, but I ended up getting into graduate school. I was privileged enough to get in, and that was enough to give me a deferment, hold off my getting drafted. And then I went ahead, and when I did graduate, I taught school. And being a school teacher back then gave me a deferment. And then I must confess, when I finally turned 25 and was out of the draft, my girlfriend and I hand-sewed a teepee and lived in Vermont on the top of a small hill. I dropped out. I was done. But I remember things like seeing the pictures of the Vietnamese women and children just before they were shot in Life magazine back in 1969, and I felt like somebody punched me in the gut. I was so impacted by that. And as I moved through life and had a family and kids, I used to say to my friends, how come we don't have a memorial to the people who died in our wars, you know, either on the other side or people who live there? I want to see that before I die. You know, just wishful thinking. And when I moved to Chicago, I was retired at the time. So I joined Veterans for Peace as an associate member. I had done for my social, when I got a social work degree, I had done an internship at the VA hospital. I had friends who had gone to Vietnam. And I have tremendous respect for those of you who've been in the military and come back and say there's got to be a better way and work for peace, as well as the other folks who've been involved in the peace movement and stand up against our whole knee-jerk militarism. So anyway, when I heard the Pentagon was spending $63 million to commemorate the war, I said to my chapter, I said, you know, we've got to do something. They're going to be sponsoring events all over the country. We've got to do something like an exhibit and travel around with it. And of course they said, we? So I just thought, I'm just going to do this. I won't rest until I do it. So I just started working on it, and luckily I just started doing the research. How could I tell the story as an artist? How could I tell it in a way that would touch people's hearts? How could I take Vietnamese voices and bring them to the fore? You know, we've got so much noise in our world, in our military and everything else, that we sometimes don't hear the suffering of other people. And so, and it was a tough road. I got it. It was tough. It was painful stuff. But I found a wonderful designer who put the panels together with my materials and made them kind of come alive. And I got some commitments from Veterans for Peace chapters throughout the country. I raised some money, and I hit the road on a 60s road trip. Basically say, if you put me up, you feed me, you get the people you need to set this thing up, you get the people you need to break it down, and you do the PR, I'll come. And I need a little money, just to defray expenses. And so I've been having one of the most amazing experiences of my life, because I've been meeting people like you guys. I've never been a big activist. I think I'm more of a witness than an activist in some way. But I met these wonderful people who've worked hard for peace, sometimes for decades, and Veterans for Peace members with all kinds of ways of resisting while they were in the military, or after they got out, or making sure they never went in the first place, and took big risks. So this feels like a small contribution, but I felt like it's so easy for us in our country to treat certain people especially people who are different than us, whether their color is different or they live in a different country and speak a funny language and wear straw hats and who knows what they're thinking about, to treat them as if they have no value, that they're disposable, expendable, collateral damage. And I just thought, no, we need to know these people as people. And I could start with Vietnam and try and work from that. Use the historical event as a lens to look through it, and then look through how did we kill 2 million people in Vietnam, 2 million civilians, and then look broader. Are we doing that today? Have we continued to do it? And then what can we do about it? How can we join together? How can we cry together? How can we plan together and laugh together? So, thank you so much. Peace Action. Veterans for Peace. I know it's a lot of work to put these kind of things together. And I'm just delighted to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. But we also have to remind ourselves that what we're talking about here is something very serious in American culture, far beyond as bad as My Lai was, far beyond My Lai. I think we know that this is part of our character. We were born in blood. The fact is that one of the first major search and destroy missions that took place just blocks away from here, the beginning of it, in 1779, in August of 1779. Remember that it was Clinton who took his bateaus, his boats, from Cooperstown, right? Flooded the lake, backed up the lake, and eventually swept down in the low waters of the Susquehanna River to get off down to what we like to call Peace Park, at the confluence of the Shenango and the Susquehanna River. Meeting him by the order of General Washington, who the Iroquois called not the father of the country, but the destroyer. That's the name they had for George Washington, the destroyer. They met, they came together. The town that I live in, just right down from that area, is where the biggest contingent came across. I live in the town of Union, maybe some of you do as well. People have no idea what that means. It's the union of Clinton and Sullivan in 1779. They went on then in a search and destroy mission, destroying all Iroquois homes, especially what they call the Three Sisters, corn, bean, and squash that they had stored. It was August of 1779. Fruit trees were in bloom. They cut down, in fruit at that time, they cut down these trees, and they were even growing peach trees up here in upstate New York. Right? Apple and pear, plums, cherry trees, all cut down. You can see up at Wells, where Wells College is, you can see a monument there. 200 of the best peach trees, Iroquois, the Cayuga people, cut down by the forces of Sullivan and Clinton. Search and destroy is not anything new in American life. At our activity out at Elmira at Mark Twain's grave, Mark Twain was vilified because he spoke out against the horrors that we were doing in the Philippines. Remember, the war was over real quick, right? The 1898 war, where the Americans annexed, as they used to say, annexed the Philippines. But they killed the Filipino people by the hundreds of thousands. It is hardly even mentioned in textbooks, hardly even talked about. That's where waterboarding started. Waterboarding. General MacArthur was a lieutenant, second lieutenant when he was there. Some of the worst atrocities. Whole villages wiped out. So My Lai is not an aberration, as they were saying. It's happened before. Mac and the others had the goods on it, right? He is following up on the goods that came, and you can tell them more about this how you came upon this and what you did to try to bring this out to not just adults, but to kids that are around today to know that there's some really bad things that have occurred, and maybe they should think more about the military. But so Mac drove in from Chicago this past Sunday, Monday,
when I finished my coursework at Broome College in December of '69, Vietnam was really quite a fire. And I had to deal with the local draft board here in Binghamton. And here's the part about it, that they have in the draft law, they have a provision for conscientious objection, but it's written for traditional peace churches, Mennonites, Quakers, and groups like that. It's not written for Catholics, because we Catholics have a tradition since the Crusades, I guess, or even further back to
That last again?
the just war theory in its best form. What it was supposed to be was a limitation on warfare. It isn't used that way. It hasn't been used that way for centuries. So you have the phenomenon of the Catholic Church being one of the biggest promoters of war in the culture. You know, like you were saying, the American Conference of Catholic Bishops was formed during World War I, or around the time of World War I, to support the war. And then it had a different name within the center. But I had the conscientious objection part of the law says you have to oppose all war. And I was ready to oppose this war. But was I ready to oppose all war? I had to really struggle with that. I said, finally, yeah. And I've learned over the years, well, that I couldn't just take the educated white man's out of that state law, but unless I was willing to say that what I was doing is something of universal significance, and I've learned that feeling has gotten ever stronger. I think I would say that nonviolence is first an option, then it's a habit, then it's a way of life, and then you finally come to realize that nonviolence is the way we're supposed to be in the first place. And that's a vision that is not really talked about.
That's the teachings of all five major religions, actually.
Yeah.
That fight amongst each other.
So the peace movement activities I've done over the years have to do with 31 arrests over 45 years, you know, civil disobedience. But even more directly is try to bring out and make real the suffering of people. That's why I went to Iraq with Kathy Kelly, Voices in the Wilderness in '99. And I just want to mention that because that comes right back to what you're saying. This is not a My Lai and other massacres of Vietnam and the search and destroy of the Iroquois by Clinton and Sullivan was not an aberration. We visited the Amariah shelter, the Amariah neighborhood of Baghdad, where this was April of '99, after the Gulf War, not and before the Bush Jr.'s invasion. There was a shelter in the Amariah district of the residential district, where people could come and gather when the planes came. It was built with a contract with a Swedish company by, with money from the Iraqi government. When there was an air raid on Baghdad by American planes, they came one night when the people were gathered in there, almost 500 people, shot an incendiary device down the pipe, down the chimney, which burned everybody. And then, they shot a bomb down the airplane. I'm trying to remember, there was 2 shots. One was a bomb that came down the chimney, and then the other one, they came back 15 minutes later and did it again with an incendiary. This kind of attack on civilian populations is part of the pattern, just like just like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the burning of cities. And that's one other point that I'd like to make, and that has to do with something that should be part of the national discourse of issues concerning war, is depleted uranium. Depleted uranium is being used to make hardened anti-tank shells, and these have been used ever since the Gulf War, and I don't know, maybe even before that. But in Iraq, it was used during the Gulf War, Bush Sr., to kill tanks. It aerosolizes. So you've got depleted uranium, which is a carcinogen just because it's a heavy metal, and it's also radioactive. And so you've got aerosolized metal in the environment, and you've got kids with horrible, horrible birth defects being born ever since. And then it happened again with Bush Jr.'s invasion. This has to be part of the dialogue. So, you know, I preach nonviolence in the sense that it's absolutely essential.
In the late 60s, against political establishment. I was against the military-industrial complex. I was a privileged student, and I was just aghast at the obvious collusion between the corporate elites and our military, and the ramifications on the draft people who were going to war. That got me into the movement per se. But as I aged and progressed in my life, I became more inclined to look at the moral aspect of things, how the collusion of our educational system. Being an educator, I saw how the well-intended educators in the institutions that I worked in were, by benign neglect, facilitating the pipeline to prison and or the military. The military because of economic injustices, as well as the prison. And I became known, because I'm not particularly shy about my convictions, as an activist in my faculty, and I still did things without the administration's authorization that attacked the moral complicity of my school and the military-industrial complex. For example, periodically the servicemen would come to our school dressed in their best uniforms and have their clipboards to sign up people and their pack of lies. Like the poster there, I created the energy piece and created a checklist of questions you'd ask the reporters. So I gave that to all my students. When that wasn't enough, because I only got a few students aware of the lies they were being told to become cannon fodder. When the recruiters came in, I had a very good relationship with my janitors because I respected them personally, and they would tell me when they were coming in, recruiters, I would have above the table where the recruiters sat all these posters in the colored board asking these questions that would pointedly belie the bullshit they were going to show to my students. Now, no one knew I was doing this, but I did it for a number of sessions, and I still felt that there was this undercurrent in our society that perpetuates people who, well-intended, get sucked into the system of military industrial complex. So then I evolved into a place where I was dealing with individual students, having them be more aware of the injustices and the vulnerability to their lives becoming a service person. and eventually having a program where students who were questioning their service recruiters would come and see me. So I became a moral advocate for peace from the foundation of political disgust. And my position now is to illuminate as much on the lies so the vermin will spatter as best as we can hope. And that's my situation currently.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you, my Greg. Very much. Always appreciate your spirit and your music.
I love your place.
Songs that linger forever and all. Hard times come again. It's a song beside the weary. Hard times come again no more. Many days you've lingered round my cabin door, singing hard times come again no more.
I think so much more experience than I have with gatherings like this. How would it be different if everybody had a nice name tag? Yeah.
Well, we seek mirth and beauty, and music light and gay. There are thrills, forms fainted at my door. Oh, their voices are silent, their pleading looks will say, hard times come again no more. It's a song beside the weary. Hard times come again no more.
Oh, yes, of course.
Any day you've lingered round my cabin door, singing hard times come again no more.
There's not a lot of people.
Introductions are so much more personal than name tags.
And then one event might be good for this group, for someone else, for everybody. But you start joining in so they can share. I don't know whether it's just suggesting I can create pictures, like this. That's what I
It's a song beside the weary. Hard times come again no more. Many days
Right.
You've lingered from my cabin door, singing hard times come again no more. Singing hard times come again no more. Singing hard times come again.
He was out there eventually all for it.
That's interesting about Broome Oh, wow, yeah. Whatever.
Maybe I'll ask